Evelyn St. Clair, at 45, was the embodiment of power and elegance. With an empire built on risky deals and ruthless decisions, she ruled her world with an iron grip. Her presence commanded every room she entered, yet there was something haunting behind her eyes, a void no amount of wealth could ever fill. That morning, her usually composed demeanor was unusually tense as she held an old, weathered envelope in her hand, as if it carried a ghost from her past. On the other side of the city, Samuel was struggling to remain composed as he pleaded with yet another hospital clerk to extend his daughter Mia's treatment. At only 8 years old, Mia's illness had aged her far beyond her years. Samuel, a humble man used to hard work, was completely unprepared for the emotional devastation of watching his daughter slowly slip away while lacking the means to save her. Evelyn and Samuel came from entirely different worlds, but fate was about to intertwine their lives in ways neither could have imagined. One overcast afternoon, in a small cafe near the hospital, they met for the first time. To Samuel, Evelyn appeared to be just another wealthy customer, but something about her distant, yet piercing gaze caught his attention. He couldn't explain it, but he felt a strange kinship, as if she too was burdened by a heavy load. Without realizing who she truly was, Samuel accidentally bumped into Evelyn while trying to reach the counter. "I'm sorry, miss, I didn't mean to," he muttered, his voice shaky, his eyes tired. Normally, Evelyn would have brushed off such an interaction, avoiding eye contact or engagement. But instead, she found herself responding softly, "No harm done." There was a sincerity in his apology that disarmed her. What began as a brief, awkward encounter soon turned into a hesitant conversation. Samuel, driven by desperation, started sharing his troubles, something he rarely did, especially with strangers. He didn't know why he felt compelled to tell her about his daughter's condition, but maybe it was because he had nothing left to lose. Evelyn listened intently, her hands trembling slightly around her coffee cup as he described Mia's illness. His words stirred something deep within her, a sense of guilt she had long buried. After that conversation, Evelyn couldn't get Samuel and Mia out of her mind. That night, she revisited painful memories of her own past, recollecting the sacrifices and decisions that had led her to where she was now. But those same decisions haunted her, and hearing Samuel's struggles awakened feelings she thought she had locked away for good. Unable to ignore her growing concern, Evelyn quietly began investigating Samuel's situation. What she uncovered was alarming. Samuel had lost nearly everything due to a series of unfortunate events, some of which, to Evelyn's horror, were connected to business deals involving her own company. It was as if invisible threads were tying their lives together in a twisted web of fate. Driven by empathy and perhaps the need for redemption, Evelyn decided to act. Without revealing her identity, she anonymously donated a substantial sum to the hospital, ensuring that Mia's treatment could continue. But deep down, Evelyn knew that money alone wasn't enough. There was a nagging pull urging her to get more involved, to personally step into their lives. She felt as if that chance encounter was no mere coincidence, and Evelyn was determined to uncover the true reason behind it. After days of battling her inner turmoil, Evelyn St. Clair made a decision. She would get closer to Samuel and Mia. She couldn't shake the gnawing sense of responsibility, but she knew she had to remain anonymous, at least for now. If Samuel discovered who she really was, it would ruin everything. Her first step was simple yet deliberate. She arranged for more anonymous payments to cover Mia's medical bills. Yet, that didn't feel like enough. Evelyn felt compelled to witness firsthand the struggle this man and his daughter were enduring. She decided to volunteer at the hospital, blending in as just another well-meaning stranger offering her time. It was a sharp contrast to the polished businesswoman the world knew her as, but Evelyn embraced the disguise, seeing it as a way to atone for her past. The first time she approached Samuel and Mia in the pediatric ward, her heart pounded in her chest. Samuel was seated by Mia's bed, holding her small hand while reading her a story. The weariness on his face told a tale of sleepless nights and constant worry. Mia, though frail and pale, smiled up at her father with a warmth that broke Evelyn's heart. Steeling herself, she gently knocked on the door and introduced herself as Eve, claiming she was a volunteer who spent time with children undergoing long-term treatment. Samuel looked at her with a mixture of suspicion and exhaustion, but managed a polite smile. "Thank you for coming, but we're doing okay," he said, his voice laced with the kind of pride that refuses charity even in the face of desperation. Evelyn, not easily deterred, replied, "I'm just here to help in any way I can. Read a book, keep Mia company, maybe just give you a chance to step out for a coffee." Mia's eyes lit up at the mention of someone reading to her. "Can you read The Little Prince to me?" she asked with a hopeful smile. Her voice was soft, weakened by her illness, but there was a brightness in her gaze that Evelyn found both heartbreaking and inspiring. Samuel hesitated, but eventually nodded, allowing Evelyn to sit beside Mia and begin reading. As the days passed, Evelyn's visits became routine. Each time she walked into that hospital room, she found herself growing more attached to the little girl with the bright smile and her resilient father. She brought small gifts for Mia, coloring books, puzzles, and on one occasion, a stuffed animal she pretended was from another generous volunteer. Samuel, though still guarded, began to let his walls down. He was grateful for the brief moments of relief Evelyn's presence provided, even if he didn't fully understand why she was so invested in helping strangers. Evelyn found herself drawn not only to Mia's innocence, but also to Samuel's strength. He was a man who had lost so much yet refused to give up. There was something admirable in his quiet determination, something that both fascinated and humbled Evelyn. Conversations between them slowly evolved from polite exchanges to deeper, more personal talks. Samuel began sharing bits of his past, how he had once been a carpenter with a thriving small business before everything fell apart. He spoke of the love he had for his late wife, the joy Mia brought him even in the darkest times, and the crushing guilt he felt for not being able to protect her better. Evelyn listened, carefully concealing the growing guilt she felt. She couldn't help but wonder if her own actions, however indirect, had contributed to the collapse of his life. But she buried that thought, focusing instead on what she could do now. Over time, Samuel grew more comfortable with Evelyn, and even Mia began to look forward to her visits. To them, she was just a kind-hearted woman volunteering her time. But Evelyn knew that every smile she received, every laugh she shared with them, was tainted by the truth she hid. The line between Evelyn's genuine concern and her hidden motives blurred with each passing day. She found herself longing to spend time with them, not out of obligation, but because, for the first time in years, she felt truly connected to other people. The icy wall she had built around her emotions was beginning to crack. Yet, as this unexpected bond deepened, Evelyn couldn't shake the fear that it would all come crashing down if the truth about her identity were revealed. Weeks went by, and what started as cautious interactions between Evelyn and Samuel slowly grew into something more meaningful. Evelyn, still appearing under the alias Eve, had become a regular presence in Mia's life. She spent afternoons at the hospital reading stories, sharing quiet moments, and even bringing homemade treats that Mia enjoyed. But the growing connection between Evelyn and Samuel was something neither had anticipated. Samuel was a private man by nature, guarded with his emotions. Yet, there was something about Evelyn that put him at ease. Perhaps it was her gentle patience, or maybe it was the way she seemed genuinely interested in hearing about his life. His hopes, his regrets, his fears. He had no idea who she really was, and that unknowing allowed him to let his guard down. With Evelyn, he felt he could speak freely without judgment, something he hadn't experienced in years. One late afternoon, after Mia had fallen asleep, Samuel and Evelyn found themselves sitting in the small hospital lounge. It was raining outside, the kind of steady downpour that matched the melancholy in the air. The conversation drifted to life's heavy burdens and the weight of unspoken grief. Samuel looked weary, his eyes reflecting years of struggle and silent suffering. "It's funny," Samuel began, staring out the window at the rain streaking down the glass. "Life doesn't prepare you for this, the slow erosion of everything you once thought was solid. You build a life, thinking you're doing everything right, but one day, it just crumbles beneath you. You're left picking up the pieces, and sometimes, there aren't enough pieces left to make sense of it all." Evelyn listened intently, her heart aching with the knowledge that her past decisions might have contributed to the ruin he spoke of. But she pushed those thoughts away, focusing instead on the moment at hand. "I can't imagine what that must be like," she replied softly. "But I do believe that even when everything falls apart, there's always something worth holding on to. Sometimes it's the smallest things that keep us going. A smile, a shared moment, a bit of kindness." Samuel nodded, though his expression remained somber. "Mia's the reason I keep fighting. Even when everything feels hopeless, she's the one thing that gives me strength. I just wish I could do more for her. She deserves so much more than this." The sincerity in his voice struck a chord with Evelyn. Beneath his struggle, there was a deep well of love and resilience that she admired. In that moment, she realized that Samuel's presence had started to fill a void in her life, a void she hadn't even fully acknowledged until now. For years, she had buried herself in her work, avoiding meaningful connections. But here she was, drawn into a life so far removed from her own, feeling more alive than she had in years. Their conversations became increasingly personal. Samuel spoke more openly about his late wife, how her death had left him shattered, yet forced him to be stronger for Mia. In return, Evelyn found herself sharing bits of her own life, carefully crafted half-truths that hinted at a past filled with regret and difficult choices. She spoke vaguely of her own losses, of paths taken that led to loneliness despite all the success she had achieved. Each conversation peeled back another layer, revealing wounds and regrets neither had shared with anyone else in a long time. As the days passed, the connection between them deepened into something that was both comforting and dangerous. Samuel began to trust Evelyn, seeing her as a friend who understood the depth of his pain. He valued her presence, not just for the distraction it provided, but because she genuinely seemed to care. Mia, too, grew fond of Evelyn, often asking for her when she wasn't around, and clinging to the moments they spent together. But for Evelyn, every warm exchange, every smile, came with a pang of guilt. The more she grew attached to them, the more she feared the day they might discover who she truly was. Yet, she couldn't bring herself to pull away. There was something pure about the bond they were forming, something she wasn't ready to lose. One evening, after another long day at the hospital, Samuel walked Evelyn to her car. The sky was turning dark, with a chill settling in the air. Before saying goodbye, he paused, looking more serious than usual. "I know you said you're just a volunteer," he began slowly, "but I have to say, it feels like you're doing a lot more than that. You've been there for us in ways that go beyond what anyone would expect. I just want you to know that it means the world to me, to Mia. You're making a difference, Eve." Evelyn swallowed hard, hiding the turmoil within. She forced a small smile. "I'm just happy to help in any way I can. Mia's a special girl, and so are you, Samuel. You deserve more than what life's thrown at you." For a moment, they stood there in silence, the weight of unsaid words hanging between them. Evelyn knew she was treading dangerous ground. The more she got involved, the more difficult it would be when the truth inevitably came out. But in that instant, with the evening's chill wrapping around them, neither was ready to let go of the fragile connection they had built. The days slipped by with Evelyn, Samuel, and Mia settling into a fragile routine. Evelyn's visits had become more frequent, and each day, her connection with Samuel deepened. She was careful, though, never revealing too much of herself, never stepping out of the role she had created as Eve, the volunteer. But even as their bond grew stronger, small inconsistencies began to gnaw at her, creating cracks in the narrative Samuel had shared about his life. It started with the little things. Samuel would mention details about his past, but sometimes those details didn't quite add up. One afternoon, as they sat together in the hospital waiting room, Samuel mentioned working as a carpenter for most of his life. But later, in a different conversation, he spoke of doing office work for several years. Evelyn brushed it off at first, telling herself that memories often blurred under the weight of stress. But as time passed, the inconsistencies grew more frequent and harder to ignore. Evelyn couldn't help but wonder if there was more to Samuel's story. She caught herself watching him more closely, picking apart his words and actions. What was he hiding? And more importantly, why did it matter so much to her? She was supposed to be helping out of empathy, maybe even guilt, but now she found herself personally invested in uncovering the truth. One day, during a routine visit, Mia was asleep, giving Evelyn and Samuel a rare quiet moment alone. Samuel looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, his clothes wrinkled from days of wear. He had been staying at the hospital almost non-stop, refusing to leave Mia's side. Evelyn felt a surge of pity mixed with concern. "You should take a break," Evelyn suggested gently. "Get some rest, even if it's just for a few hours." "I'll stay here with Mia." Samuel shook his head. "I can't leave her, Eve. Not when things are so uncertain. Besides, I don't sleep much anyway." He sighed heavily, leaning back in his chair. "It's funny. Even when I do sleep, I dream of the life I had before all this. It's like it haunts me." "What do you dream about?" Evelyn asked, her curiosity piqued. Samuel's gaze shifted, as if debating how much to reveal. "Sometimes I dream of my wife. Other times, I see myself back at work, before everything fell apart. But lately, I dream of places I've never even been, people I've never met. It's strange, almost as if my mind's mixing memories that don't belong together." There it was again, those inconsistencies. Evelyn's instincts screamed that something wasn't right. She knew she was treading dangerous ground, but she couldn't help probing further. "You mentioned you worked as a carpenter, but also that you had experience in an office. Did you have two careers?" Samuel looked momentarily startled, but quickly masked it with a smile. "Oh yeah, I did some office work before getting into carpentry full-time. It was a while back though, different lifetime really." Evelyn nodded, pretending to accept the explanation, but something about his response felt rehearsed, almost too smooth. The nagging suspicion at the back of her mind grew stronger. She couldn't shake the feeling that there were layers to Samuel's life that he was intentionally keeping hidden. That evening, as she drove home, Evelyn's thoughts were in turmoil. She had come into their lives out of a desire to help, to ease her own guilt, but now she was becoming entangled in something much more complicated. Why would Samuel need to lie about his past? What was he running from? Determined to find answers, Evelyn discreetly began looking into Samuel's background. With her resources, it didn't take long to uncover fragments of his past, most of which aligned with what he had told her. But there were gaps, missing pieces that didn't make sense. Certain records seemed incomplete or strangely vague. The more she dug, the more questions arose, and with each discovery, her concern deepened. Back at the hospital, the atmosphere between them grew subtly tense. Samuel started noticing Evelyn's probing questions, and although he remained polite, there was a guardedness in his eyes. He could sense that she was getting too close, that she was beginning to see through the cracks in his story. One afternoon, as they sat in Mia's room, the tension finally broke. Samuel, his voice edged with weariness, turned to Evelyn and said, "You've been kind, more than anyone could ask for, but I can't help wondering. Why are you really doing all this, Eve? People don't just show up and start helping strangers out of nowhere." Evelyn's heart raced. She wasn't prepared for this. I care about you and Mia. I want to help. Isn't that enough?" Samuel studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Maybe it is, or maybe there's something more. Just remember, not everyone wants their life under a microscope." It was a warning, clear and unmistakable. Evelyn realized she had pushed too far, and she backed off, but the damage was done. A subtle rift had formed between them, one that neither fully acknowledged but both could feel. As she left the hospital that day, Evelyn couldn't shake the sense that everything was spiraling in a direction she hadn't anticipated. She had wanted to help, to make amends for the shadows of her past, but now she was entangled in a mystery far more complicated than she'd imagined. The bond she shared with Samuel was slipping into something fragile, built on trust that could shatter at any moment. And beneath it all, Evelyn knew one truth. The deeper she went, the harder it would be to walk away unscathed. The tension between Evelyn and Samuel simmered just beneath the surface after their last conversation. Both tried to ignore it, but the unspoken doubts lingered like a shadow. Despite this, Evelyn continued her visits, refusing to let go of the connection they had built. But with each passing day, the stakes grew higher, and the trust between them became increasingly fragile. One evening, Evelyn arrived at the hospital with a small gift for Mia, a handmade bracelet with her name engraved on it. Mia's eyes lit up as she took the bracelet, smiling wide. "Thank you, Eve. I love it," she beamed, slipping it onto her thin wrist. For a moment, the joy in Mia's face brought a sense of relief to both Evelyn and Samuel. But the happiness was fleeting, quickly overshadowed by the weight of everything left unsaid. Samuel's weariness seemed to deepen with every passing day. The constant stress of Mia's condition, combined with the growing suspicion that Evelyn was digging into his past, left him on edge. His once open demeanor had become more cautious, his conversations laced with hints of guardedness. Evelyn could sense the shift, but she didn't know how to bridge the gap without revealing the truth. One night, as they sat together in the hospital lounge, the air thick with unspoken tension, Samuel finally broke the silence. "I've been thinking a lot, Eve," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion, "about everything, Mia, life, how it all got to this point. Sometimes I wonder if there's a purpose behind all this suffering, or if it's just random, cruel luck." Evelyn looked at him, her heart aching at the sadness in his eyes. "I think sometimes life throws things at us to test what we're made of," she replied softly. "But I also think sometimes we have to face the consequences of decisions we made in the past, even if we didn't realize what they'd lead to." There was a pause, a beat where both of them seemed to be weighing the deeper meaning behind her words. Samuel's expression darkened slightly, as if he sensed that Evelyn was hinting at something more. "You're right," he said slowly. "Choices have consequences. And sometimes, those choices follow us no matter how much we want to leave them behind." The intensity of his tone made Evelyn's chest tighten. She had come into his life hoping to make amends, but she was now entangled in a web of guilt and uncertainty. The closer she grew to Samuel and Mia, the more difficult it became to conceal the truth of who she really was and how deeply she might be tied to Samuel's past suffering. As their conversations grew more intense, they started delving into topics neither of them had openly discussed before. They spoke of regret, redemption, and the moments that defined who they had become. In these vulnerable exchanges, they both found a sense of comfort and understanding, but there was always an undercurrent of something darker, an unspoken tension neither could fully articulate. Evelyn found herself increasingly conflicted. On one hand, she cherished the moments of raw honesty she shared with Samuel. On the other, every passing day made it harder to keep up the lie. Her guilt gnawed at her relentlessly, especially as she watched Samuel pour out his heart about the struggles of raising Mia alone, the crushing burden of feeling powerless as a father. Evelyn's empathy was genuine, but it was tainted by the knowledge that she was still deceiving him. One evening, the tension finally reached a breaking point. They were sitting by Mia's bed, the room dimly lit as she slept. The quiet was interrupted only by the steady beep of the heart monitor. Samuel turned to Evelyn, his voice low but laced with emotion. "You've been a good friend, Eve. I don't know where we'd be without you. But there's something I need to ask. Why does it feel like you're hiding something from me?" Evelyn froze, her breath catching in her throat. She had feared this moment, knowing it was inevitable. She tried to mask her panic with a soft smile. "Hiding something? I've told you everything that matters." But Samuel's gaze remained steady, searching her face for any sign of deception. "You've been kind, generous, more than I could ever ask for. But there are moments. I get the feeling you're carrying a burden of your own, something you're not telling me. And I'm not sure if I should trust what you're showing me." The words hung in the air like a heavy weight, pressing down on them both. Evelyn's mind raced, torn between coming clean and continuing the charade. She had become so entangled in this situation that any choice she made felt like a betrayal, either of Samuel's trust or her own need for redemption. She took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "We all have our burdens, Samuel. Some are just harder to talk about than others. But I promise you, my intentions are pure. I care about you and Mia more than I ever expected." Samuel's expression softened, but the suspicion didn't fully leave his eyes. He nodded slowly, letting the conversation drop, but the seed of doubt had been planted. The trust they had built was now fragile, and Evelyn knew it wouldn't take much for it to shatter completely. As she left the hospital that night, Evelyn felt a growing sense of dread. The truth was hanging over her like a storm cloud, and she could sense that it was only a matter of time before everything unraveled. But for now, she held on to the fragile connection they still shared, hoping against hope that she could find a way to make things right before it all came crashing down. The tension between Evelyn and Samuel lingered like a heavy cloud, neither of them fully acknowledging it, but both acutely aware of its presence. Evelyn's guilt grew with each passing day, her fear of being discovered gnawing at her conscience. She knew she couldn't keep up the pretense forever, but she wasn't prepared for how quickly everything would come crashing down. It happened one late afternoon. Evelyn had arrived at the hospital as usual, but there was a sense of unease in the air. Samuel seemed distant, more so than before, and Evelyn could tell something was weighing on his mind. She tried to engage him in conversation, but his responses were curt, distracted. "Mia's doing better today," Evelyn said, attempting to lighten the mood. "She smiled a lot during our story time." Samuel nodded absently, his eyes fixed on a spot across the room. "That's good," he replied, his voice flat. Evelyn frowned, her concern growing. "Is everything all right, Samuel? You seem different today." For a moment, Samuel didn't respond. He simply sat there, staring into space, as if lost in thought. Then, slowly, he turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Eve, there's something I need to talk to you about." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. She had dreaded this moment, the moment when Samuel would finally confront her. But before she could say anything, he continued, "I've been thinking a lot about the things we've talked about. The things you've done for us," Samuel began, his voice tense. "You've been so kind, so generous, but something hasn't felt right. And I couldn't shake the feeling that you were keeping something from me." Evelyn's throat tightened, panic setting in. She tried to keep her voice steady. "Samuel, I told you. I'm just trying to help. I care about you and Mia." Samuel's gaze bore into hers, searching for the truth. "That's just it, Eve. I started wondering why someone like you would go out of their way for complete strangers. And then, I did some digging." Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face. She had been so careful, so meticulous in keeping her identity hidden, but now it was clear that Samuel had uncovered something. "I looked into you," Samuel said, his tone growing colder. "It wasn't easy, but I finally figured it out." Evelyn St. Clair, CEO of St. Clair Industries. The same company responsible for the layoffs that destroyed my business. The same company that made decisions that led to the chain of events that took everything from me and put Mia in this hospital. The room seemed to close in on Evelyn, the walls pressing down on her as the weight of Samuel's words sank in. She opened her mouth to speak, to explain, but no words came out. She had spent so long hiding the truth, and now it was out in the open, raw and undeniable. Samuel's voice trembled with barely suppressed anger. "You lied to me. You pretended to care, all while knowing you were part of the reason my life fell apart. Why? Why would you do this?" Evelyn finally found her voice, but it was weak, trembling. "Samuel, I didn't know. I didn't realize how much my decisions had affected you. I came here because I wanted to make things right, to help." "Help?" Samuel interrupted, his voice rising. "You think throwing money at us would fix this? You think pretending to be someone you're not would make up for the damage you've done?" Evelyn shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "I never meant to hurt you, Samuel. I swear, I didn't know. I didn't know how connected we were until it was too late." Samuel stood up, his face twisted in pain and betrayal. "You had no right to come into our lives like this. You had no right to make me trust you, to make Mia care about you. And now everything is tainted by this lie." Evelyn reached out, desperate to make him understand. "Please, Samuel, I never meant to deceive you. I just wanted to help, to make amends for the past." But Samuel stepped back, his expression hardening. "It's too late for that, Evelyn. You can't undo what's been done. You can't erase the years of pain and loss." The words struck Evelyn like a blow, leaving her reeling. She had come into their lives with good intentions, but now she realized the damage she had caused. She had taken a fragile situation and shattered it completely. Samuel's voice was cold, final. "I want you to leave, Evelyn. Don't come back." We don't need your help anymore." Evelyn felt her heart break as she looked at the man she had come to care for, the man whose life she had unwittingly destroyed. She had no choice but to respect his wishes. With tears streaming down her face, she turned and walked out of the hospital room, leaving behind the people she had tried so hard to save. As she stepped into the cold evening air, Evelyn knew that she had lost everything. Her chance at redemption, the fragile bond she had formed with Samuel and Mia, and any hope of making things right. The truth had come out, and with it, the devastating realization that some things could never be undone. Evelyn left the hospital that night feeling utterly broken. Samuel's words echoed in her mind, each one cutting deeper than the last. She had thought she could make amends, that she could somehow balance the scales by helping Samuel and Mia, but instead, she had only caused more pain. And now she was faced with the crushing reality that her actions had only made things worse. For days, Evelyn retreated into herself, avoiding her usual routines and isolating herself from the world. The weight of her guilt was suffocating, and the knowledge that she had been the cause of so much suffering left her feeling powerless and ashamed. She had always prided herself on being in control, on being able to fix any problem that came her way. But now, for the first time in years, she felt completely helpless. Meanwhile, Samuel was struggling with his own inner turmoil. He had been deeply hurt by Evelyn's deception, but beneath the anger and betrayal, there was a part of him that missed her. He couldn't deny that her presence had brought comfort and hope during some of the darkest days of his life. But now, every memory of their time together was tainted by the knowledge of who she really was and the role she had played in his downfall. Despite his resolve to cut ties with her, Samuel couldn't shake the conflicting emotions that gnawed at him. He had been so quick to push her away, to protect himself and Mia from further harm, but now he wondered if he had made the right choice. After all, Evelyn had shown genuine care for Mia, and her efforts to help had been real, even if they were born out of guilt. He found himself questioning whether he had been too harsh, whether there was a chance for forgiveness, or at least understanding. Mia, too, sensed the change in the atmosphere. She asked about Evelyn, her innocent questions cutting through Samuel like a knife. "Where's Eve? Is she coming back?" she would ask, her small voice filled with hope. Samuel struggled to find the right words to explain to his daughter why the woman she had come to care for was no longer visiting. Each time he tried, the words stuck in his throat, and he could only manage a vague, "She's not coming anymore, sweetheart." Mia's disappointment was palpable, and it weighed heavily on Samuel's heart. He had always wanted to protect her from the harsh realities of life, but now he was forced to confront the fact that, despite his best efforts, he couldn't shield her from everything. She had grown attached to Evelyn, and now she was left with another void in her life, another loss to add to the list. As the days turned into weeks, Samuel found himself increasingly tormented by his conflicting emotions. He couldn't deny the anger he felt toward Evelyn, but he also couldn't ignore the small voice in the back of his mind that whispered doubts. Had he been too quick to judge? Had he allowed his pain to cloud his judgment, to push away someone who had genuinely tried to help? In the midst of this inner conflict, Mia's condition took a turn for the worse. One night, she suffered a severe relapse, her breathing shallow, her small body racked with pain. Samuel was thrown into a panic, rushing to her side, desperate to help but feeling utterly powerless. The doctors worked tirelessly, stabilizing her condition, but the fear of losing her consumed Samuel completely. As he sat by Mia's bedside, watching her sleep, the reality of his situation hit him like a ton of bricks. He was alone, fighting a battle that seemed impossible to win. He had pushed away the one person who had been there for them, the one person who had brought even a glimmer of hope into their lives. And now, he was left with nothing but his own guilt and the overwhelming fear of losing the most important person in his life. In that moment, Samuel realized that his anger toward Evelyn had been a shield, a way to protect himself from the pain of his past. But now, as he looked at his daughter, so fragile and vulnerable, he couldn't help but see the futility of holding on to that anger. It was consuming him, blinding him to the reality that Evelyn, despite her faults and the pain she had caused, had genuinely tried to make amends. The next morning, After a long and sleepless night, Samuel made a decision. He couldn't change the past, and he couldn't erase the pain Evelyn's deception had caused, but he could at least try to understand. He owed it to Mia, and perhaps even to himself, to seek closure, to confront Evelyn one last time, and try to make sense of the tangled web of emotions that had ensnared them both. With Mia stable for the time being, Samuel left the hospital and headed toward Evelyn's office. He wasn't sure what he would say or how the conversation would unfold, but he knew he couldn't move forward without facing her again. He needed to hear her side of the story, to understand her motivations, and perhaps in doing so, find a way to make peace with the past. As he approached the towering glass building where Evelyn worked, Samuel's heart pounded in his chest. He felt a mix of anger, fear, and a faint hope that maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance to find some sort of resolution. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside, determined to confront the woman who had become both his tormentor and his only ally in this impossible fight. Samuel stood in the sleek lobby of St. Clair Industries, feeling out of place amid the polished marble floors and glass walls. He had never imagined setting foot in a place like this, let alone for a reason as complicated as confronting Evelyn. But here he was, driven by a need for answers and a desperate hope that something good could still come from the mess they were both tangled in. As he approached the reception desk, his resolve wavered. What was he really expecting from this meeting? An apology? An explanation? Did he even know what he wanted to hear? Before he could second-guess himself, the receptionist looked up with a polite smile. "How can I help you, sir?" Samuel swallowed hard. "I'm here to see Evelyn St. Clair. My name is Samuel. It's personal." The receptionist's smile faltered slightly, but she quickly recovered, typing something into her computer. After a brief moment, she looked back up at him. "I'll let Miss St. Clair know you're here. Please have a seat." Samuel nodded, finding a seat in the corner of the lobby. He tried to steady his nerves, but his mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. He wondered how Evelyn would react to seeing him here, whether she would even agree to talk to him. A part of him feared that this confrontation would only deepen the wounds they both carried, but another part hoped it might offer some closure, some clarity. After what felt like an eternity, the receptionist gestured for him to follow. "Miss St. Clair will see you now. Please come this way." Samuel followed her through a series of hallways, each one more opulent than the last, until they reached a large wooden door. The receptionist knocked lightly, then opened the door, revealing a spacious office with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city. Evelyn stood by the window, her back to the door, as if she had been expecting him but needed a moment to collect herself. "Miss St. Clair, Samuel is here to see you," the receptionist announced before quietly exiting, leaving them alone. Evelyn turned slowly, her face a mask of controlled emotions. Seeing Samuel in her office felt surreal, as if two worlds that should never have collided were suddenly thrown together in the most jarring way. She took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice steady. "Samuel, I wasn't expecting you." Samuel didn't respond immediately. He took a moment to take in the sight of her, standing there in her elegant office, so different from the woman he had known as Eve. It was a stark reminder of the vast gulf between their lives, a reminder that left him feeling small and out of place. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and filled with a mix of anger and confusion. "I wasn't sure if I should come, but I couldn't stop thinking about everything. I need to understand why you did what you did, why you thought lying to me was the way to make things right." Evelyn looked down, guilt tightening around her heart. She had prepared for this moment, but now that it was here, she struggled to find the right words. "Samuel, I know what I did was wrong. I never intended to deceive you. I didn't know how to approach you, how to make amends for the damage my decisions caused." Samuel's eyes narrowed, his frustration evident. "You think pretending to be someone else, worming your way into our lives under false pretenses, was the way to make amends? All you did was make me trust you, only to rip that trust away." Evelyn winced at his words, feeling the full weight of his anger. "I know. I'm so sorry, Samuel. I thought I could help you and Mia without making it about my past, without dragging you into the mess I created. But I see now how wrong I was. I should have been honest from the start." Samuel shook his head, struggling to process the emotions swirling inside him. I don't even know what to believe anymore. You came into our lives when we were at our lowest, and for a while, I actually thought you cared. But now I don't know if any of it was real. It was real, Evelyn said urgently, taking a step closer. Everything I did for Mia, every moment I spent with you, it was real. I care about you both more than I ever expected to. That's why this is so hard, Samuel. Because I know I've hurt you, and I hate myself for it. The sincerity in her voice gave Samuel pause. He had expected her to defend her actions, to justify the lies. But instead, she was laying bare her guilt, her regret. It was disarming, and it made him see her in a slightly different light. Not just as the powerful CEO who had ruined his life, but as a person grappling with her own failures. For a moment, the anger in him receded, replaced by a weary sadness. I don't know what to do with this, Evelyn. I don't know how to move forward from here. Evelyn felt a tear slip down her cheek, quickly brushing it away. I don't have all the answers, Samuel. I wish I did. But I want to make things right, if you'll let me. Not as Eve, not as some faceless benefactor, but as myself. I want to help Mia, and I want to help you. If you can find it in your heart to forgive me. Samuel looked at her, his emotions a chaotic mix of anger, confusion, and a faint glimmer of hope. He didn't know if he could forgive her, or if he even wanted to. But as he thought of Mia, lying in that hospital bed, he knew that his pride couldn't be the thing that stood in the way of her getting the help she needed. Before he could respond, Samuel's phone rang, the sound piercing the heavy silence between them. He glanced at the screen, his face draining of color. It's the hospital, he said, his voice shaky as he answered the call. The doctor's voice on the other end was calm but urgent. Mr. Porter, we need you to come to the hospital right away. Mia's condition has taken a critical turn. Samuel's heart stopped, fear clawing at him. I'll be right there, he managed to say before hanging up. He turned to Evelyn, his face pale with terror. Mia, she's in trouble. I have to go. Without hesitation, Evelyn grabbed her coat. I'm coming with you. There was no time for arguments, no time for further discussion. In that moment, all that mattered was getting to Mia. They raced out of the office together, the weight of their unresolved conflict hanging over them, but united in their desperate need to reach Mia in time. As they drove to the hospital, the city lights flashing by in a blur, Samuel's mind was a whirlwind of fear and regret. He had pushed Evelyn away, but now she was the only person he wanted by his side. The thought of losing Mia was unbearable, and in that moment, he realized that whatever anger he felt toward Evelyn paled in comparison to the terror of losing his daughter. When they arrived at the hospital, they were met by a team of doctors who quickly briefed them on Mia's condition. She was stable for now, but the situation was dire. They would do everything they could, but there were no guarantees. Samuel's legs nearly gave out as he listened to the doctors. Evelyn reached out, steadying him, her own heart breaking at the sight of his despair. They rushed to Mia's room, where she lay unconscious, her small body connected to a maze of tubes and monitors. As they stood by Mia's bedside, the reality of the situation hit them both with full force. The anger, the guilt, the lies. All of it faded away in the face of their shared love for this little girl. Evelyn gently took Samuel's hand, and this time, he didn't pull away. They stood together, united in their fear and their hope, praying that somehow, Mia would find the strength to pull through. In that quiet moment, as the machines beeped softly around them, Samuel realized that forgiveness might not come easily, but it was a step he needed to take, for Mia's sake and for his own. And perhaps, just perhaps, it might also be a step toward healing the wounds they had both carried for so long. The hours that followed were a blur of anxiety and quiet desperation. Samuel and Evelyn stayed by Mia's side, refusing to leave her even for a moment. The sterile smell of the hospital, the rhythmic beeping of the monitors, and the dim lighting created a surreal atmosphere where time seemed to stretch endlessly. Every breath Mia took felt like a small victory, but the fear of losing her loomed large, casting a shadow over everything. As the night wore on, Evelyn found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. how a single decision to help had spiraled into something far more complex and painful than she had ever anticipated. She looked at Samuel, his face etched with worry, and felt a deep pang of regret. If only she had been honest from the start, perhaps they wouldn't be in this mess. But now, all she could do was be there for him, hoping that somehow they could find a way forward together. Just before dawn, Mia's condition stabilized. The doctors assured Samuel and Evelyn that she was out of immediate danger, but her road to recovery would be long and uncertain. The relief was palpable, but it was tinged with the exhaustion of having been on edge for so long. Samuel sat heavily in the chair beside Mia's bed, his body sagging with fatigue. Evelyn reached out, resting a comforting hand on his shoulder. "She's strong, Samuel. She'll pull through this," Evelyn said softly, though her voice was laced with the vulnerability she rarely allowed herself to show. Samuel nodded, but there was a distant look in his eyes. "I hope so. She's all I have left," he murmured. Then, after a long pause, he added, "I need some air. I'll be back in a bit." Evelyn watched as he stood up and left the room, her heart heavy with concern. She understood that he needed space, but something about his demeanor troubled her. There was a finality in his tone that she couldn't shake, as if he had made a decision that he hadn't yet shared with her. Hours passed, and Samuel didn't return. Evelyn's worry grew with each passing minute. She asked the nurses if they had seen him, but no one had. She tried calling his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Panic began to set in as she realized that something was very wrong. Evelyn quickly made her way through the hospital, searching every waiting room, every hallway, but Samuel was nowhere to be found. Returning to Mia's room, Evelyn found a small envelope lying on the chair where Samuel had been sitting. Her name was written on it in his familiar handwriting. With trembling hands, she opened it, her heart pounding as she pulled out a folded piece of paper. The letter inside was brief, but every word hit her like a blow. "Evelyn, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I'm sorry for leaving like this, but I need you to understand, it's not because of you. Not entirely, at least. I've been carrying this weight for too long. The anger, the guilt, the feeling that I failed everyone I cared about. And now, with Mia's life hanging in the balance, I realize that I'm the one who's been holding her back. You were right about choices and consequences. My choices brought us to this point, but I can't keep dragging Mia down with me. She deserves a chance at a better life, a life where she's not burdened by my failures. That's why I'm leaving. I need to give her that chance, and the only way to do that is to get out of the way. Enclosed, you'll find everything you need to take care of her. Legal documents, financial information, everything. I'm trusting you to make the right decisions for her, because I know you will. You're the only person I believe can give her the life she deserves. I'm sorry for everything, for the lies, for the pain. But most of all, I'm sorry I couldn't be the man Mia needed me to be. Please, take care of her. Give her the love and the future I couldn't. Samuel." Evelyn stared at the letter, her hands shaking as tears blurred her vision. The enormity of what Samuel had done, the desperation that had driven him to leave, was almost too much to bear. He had walked away from his daughter, from the one person he loved more than anything in the world, because he believed she would be better off without him. It was an act of selflessness born from a place of deep pain and hopelessness, and it shattered Evelyn's heart. She frantically searched the envelope, finding the documents Samuel had mentioned. Legal papers granting her temporary guardianship of Mia, financial statements, and a list of contacts for the doctors and caregivers who would be needed for Mia's ongoing treatment. Samuel had thought of everything, meticulously planning his departure so that Mia would be cared for in his absence. But Evelyn couldn't accept it. She couldn't accept that Samuel had given up on himself, that he had left Mia to be raised without her father. She couldn't bear the thought of Mia waking up to find that Samuel was gone, that the one person she depended on had disappeared from her life without explanation. Desperation fueled her as she grabbed her phone, trying once again to reach Samuel. She left message after message, pleading with him to come back, to rethink his decision. But there was no response. It was as if he had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the ghost of his presence and the crushing weight of his final decision. Evelyn knew she couldn't let this be the end. She had to find him, had to bring him back, not just for Mia's sake, but for his own. Samuel was lost, consumed by guilt and despair, but she refused to believe that he was beyond saving. She had seen the strength in him, the love he had for his daughter, and she knew that deep down, he didn't truly want to abandon her. But the clock was ticking, and with every moment that passed, the chances of finding Samuel grew slimmer. Evelyn knew she had to act quickly, but she also knew she couldn't do it alone. She needed help, and there was only one person she could think of who might have the resources to track him down. With a steely resolve, Evelyn picked up the phone and made the call. The voice on the other end was surprised to hear from her, but when she explained the situation, there was no hesitation. Arrangements were made, and within the hour, a team of private investigators was dispatched to locate Samuel. As she waited for news, Evelyn returned to Mia's room. She sat by the bedside, holding the little girl's hand, her heart breaking at the thought of what might come next. She knew she had to be strong, for Mia's sake, but the fear of losing both Samuel and Mia was overwhelming. Hours passed with no word from the investigators. Each minute felt like an eternity, the silence of the hospital room pressing down on her like a physical weight. Evelyn's mind raced with worst-case scenarios, each more terrifying than the last. She had been so focused on finding Samuel that she hadn't even considered what she would do if they couldn't bring him back. The thought was too painful to entertain. Finally, just as the sun began to set, her phone rang. She answered it with a trembling hand, holding her breath as she listened to the voice on the other end. "We found him," the investigator said, his tone serious. "He's at the bus station, buying a ticket. He hasn't left yet, but you don't have much time." Evelyn didn't wait for more details. She grabbed her coat and rushed out of the hospital, her heart pounding as she raced to the bus station. She had one chance to stop Samuel, one chance to make him see that running away wasn't the answer. As she neared the station, Evelyn's thoughts were a whirlwind of emotions. She didn't know what she would say to him, how she would convince him to come back. All she knew was that she couldn't let him leave like this, not after everything they had been through. When she arrived, she scanned the crowded terminal, her eyes searching desperately for any sign of him. And then she saw him, standing alone near the ticket counter, a small duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He looked lost, defeated, a man who had given up on everything. "Samuel," she called out, her voice breaking with emotion. He turned at the sound of her voice, his eyes widening in surprise. For a moment, they just stared at each other across the distance, the weight of everything unspoken hanging between them. Finally, Evelyn closed the gap between them, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "You can't do this," she pleaded, her voice shaking. "You can't leave Mia. She needs you, Samuel. You need her." Samuel looked away, his expression pained. "I'm doing this for her, Evelyn. She deserves better than me." "No," Evelyn said firmly, reaching out to grab his hand. "She deserves her father. She deserves to grow up knowing how much you love her. Don't take that away from her. Don't take that away from yourself." Tears filled Samuel's eyes as he struggled to keep his composure. "I've failed her, Evelyn. I've failed everyone. I don't know how to fix this." "We'll figure it out together," Evelyn said softly, squeezing his hand. "But you can't run away from this. You're stronger than you think, Samuel. You've been through so much, and you're still standing. Don't give up now. Mia needs you, and so do I." The sincerity in her voice, the raw emotion in her eyes, broke through the wall Samuel had built around himself. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could be the father Mia needed him to be. Slowly, he nodded, his resolve crumbling. "Okay," he whispered, his voice choked with tears. "I'll come back." Evelyn let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, relief flooding through her. She pulled him into a tight embrace, holding him close as they both cried, the weight of everything they had been through finally releasing in each other's arms. They stayed like that for a long time, until finally, Samuel pulled back, his eyes red but determined. "Let's go home," he said, his voice steady for the first time in weeks. Evelyn nodded, and together, they left the bus station, heading back to the hospital where Mia was waiting for them. They still had a long road ahead, but for the first time, they were facing it together, united in their love for Mia and their determination to give her the future she deserved. As they walked side by side, Evelyn knew that they had both been given a chance to heal, to forgive, and to build something new from the ashes of their past. And this time, they wouldn't let anything tear them apart. The days that followed Samuel's return were filled with a quiet determination. Evelyn and Samuel focused on Mia, channeling their energies into her recovery. The tension that had once defined their relationship had eased, replaced by a mutual understanding and an unspoken commitment to move forward. But as the days turned into weeks, the looming question of what would come next began to press in on Evelyn. Mia's health gradually improved. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, and with Samuel by her side, she seemed to gain strength each day. The relief in Samuel's eyes was palpable, but Evelyn knew that their challenges weren't over. Samuel had returned, but the weight of his past, and her own, still lingered, unresolved. One afternoon, after Mia had fallen asleep, Evelyn and Samuel sat together in the hospital's small garden. The late autumn sun cast long shadows, and the crisp air was filled with the scent of falling leaves. Samuel turned to Evelyn, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking a lot," he began, his voice steady but tinged with uncertainty, "about everything that's happened, about what comes next." Evelyn nodded, her heart heavy with the same thoughts. She had spent countless sleepless nights wrestling with the decision she knew she had to make. The truth of her involvement in Samuel's downfall had come to light, but she hadn't yet faced the broader implications of that truth. She knew she couldn't hide forever, but the path forward was fraught with risk, both for her and for those she cared about. "I have too," she admitted, her voice quiet. "I've been thinking about what it would mean to come clean, to publicly take responsibility for what my company did to you, to so many others. It's something I should have done a long time ago." Samuel looked at her, surprised by the resolve in her voice. "Evelyn, you don't have to do that. What's done is done. We're moving forward now, trying to rebuild. I don't want you to destroy everything you've built because of me." Evelyn shook her head, her expression firm. "It's not just about you, Samuel. It's about making things right, truly right. I've spent my life building a fortune, making decisions that benefited me but hurt others, and I've lived with the guilt of that for too long. I can't keep running from it." Samuel's gaze softened, and he reached out to take her hand. "You've done more than enough, Evelyn. You've been here for Mia, for me. You've given us hope when we had none. You don't owe anyone anything more." Evelyn squeezed his hand, her heart swelling with gratitude for his words. But deep down, she knew that this was a decision she had to make for herself. It wasn't just about Samuel or Mia. It was about facing the truth and finding a way to live with it. "There's something else," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "If I do this, if I go public with the truth, it's going to affect everything. My company, my reputation, our lives. I need to know that you're ready for that, because it won't be easy." Samuel was silent for a moment, considering her words. He had spent so long trying to protect Mia, trying to shield her from the harsh realities of the world. But he also knew that Evelyn was right. Living with a lie, no matter how well-intentioned, wasn't truly living at all. "If it's what you need to do, I'll support you," he said finally, his voice steady with conviction. "We'll face whatever comes together. You've been there for us, Evelyn. Now it's our turn to stand by you." Evelyn felt a surge of emotion, a mix of fear and relief. She had spent so long running from her past, but now, with Samuel by her side, she felt the strength to face it head-on. The next day, Evelyn made the call that would change everything. She contacted a journalist she trusted, someone who had spent years exposing corporate corruption and who had once tried to hold her company accountable. The journalist was surprised to hear from her, but agreed to meet. When they sat down together, Evelyn laid everything out, every decision, every consequence, and the guilt that had driven her to this moment. The interview was raw, emotional, and unflinchingly honest. Evelyn didn't shy away from the truth, even when it painted her in the harshest light. She spoke of the lives her decisions had impacted, the people like Samuel who had suffered because of her pursuit of success. And she spoke of her desire to make amends, to use her resources to help those she had hurt. and to finally step away from the empire she had built on the backs of others. The article was published the following week, and the fallout was immediate. St. Clair Industries faced a public reckoning, with investors pulling out, lawsuits being filed, and the media swarming the story. Evelyn's name was dragged through the mud, her reputation tarnished beyond repair. But through it all, she stood firm, refusing to back down from the truth she had finally embraced. Samuel watched the chaos unfold with a mix of admiration and concern. He knew how much Evelyn was sacrificing, how much she was losing, but he also knew that this was her way of finding peace. And as the storm raged around them, he and Mia stood by her side, offering the support she had once given them. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn began the long process of dismantling her company, using the funds to establish a foundation dedicated to helping those who had been hurt by corporate greed. She sold her properties, liquidated her assets, and poured everything into the cause she now believed in so deeply. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt a sense of purpose that went beyond herself. She was no longer driven by the need for power or wealth, but by the desire to make a difference in the world, to right the wrongs she had once been a part of. And through it all, Samuel and Mia remained a constant source of strength. The bond they had forged through pain and hardship had only grown stronger, and together, they faced the future with a renewed sense of hope. As winter turned to spring, Evelyn, Samuel, and Mia settled into a new rhythm. They moved into a modest home in a quiet neighborhood, far from the glare of the media and the chaos of the corporate world. Their days were filled with simple joys: Mia's laughter, long walks in the park, and the comfort of being together. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Mia curled up between them. Samuel turned to Evelyn with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked softly. "The life you had before all this?" Evelyn shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "No," she said simply. "I have everything I need right here." Samuel nodded, understanding. They had both lost so much, but in the end, they had found something far more valuable: each other. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in a warm, golden light, Evelyn knew that she had finally found peace. The road to get here had been long and difficult, filled with mistakes and regrets, but it had also led her to the life she had never known she wanted. And as she sat there, surrounded by the people she loved, she knew that they would face whatever the future held together. No more lies, no more running, just the quiet, steady strength of knowing that they had survived the storm and come out the other side, stronger and more united than ever before. If you enjoyed this heartwarming story about overcoming challenges and family love, don't forget to like the video, comment on what touched you the most, and subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned for our next